Welcome to the Chicken Bites podcast. In today's discussion, tax expert Charles de Wet explains the concerning discrepancies in the interpretation of meat offal proposed in the draft bill for zero-rated food items. This comes just weeks before the implementation of the VAT rate increase to 15.5%, leaving retailers and consumers little clarification on which food items are zero-rated. Good morning, Charles, and thank you for joining us. What are the primary inconsistencies in the classification of meat offal products within the drafted bill, and how might this affect implementation of the zero-rated food items?
Hi, Jenny, and great to be talking to you again about this. And I think it's good news that there has been an announcement on additional zero ratings. But as you've indicated, we are a little bit concerned about the definitions that have been provided in the circumstances. If you sort of started off at what the minister said in his budget speech, they spoke about offal that would now be zero rated, and they've kind of included all species in that. They spoke about their sort of bovine and ovine and porcine and caprine, and then also Gallus domesticus, which is chicken. Just as a matter of interest, that legislation now talks about domesticated cattle and not bovine in the circumstances. And then the wording is interesting in the sense that it refers to, it talks about edible offal. Now, edible offal is defined in the Agricultural Products Act, and we know that generally when SARS interprets these provisions, all the zero-rated provisions, they reference the Agricultural Products Act. But then the legislation kind of goes further than that, and sort of adds selective words as well. So it talks about in relation to domestic cattle, and then sheep, pork, and goats. It talks about livers, hearts, kidneys, soup and marrow bones. Now, soup and marrow bones are typically not offal, and I'll come back to that point. Tails, ears, tongues, intestines, clean tripe, heads and trotters. So that was in respect of cattle, sheep, pork, and goats. Whereas in respect of chicken, it talks about heads, feet, giblets, and cleaned intestines. Now, in the referring again to the Agricultural Products Act, giblets, seems to include sort of livers, hearts, and kidneys as well. But there's sort of no certainty as far as that's concerned. And then there's also this difference between intestines and clean tripe, and then cleaned intestines. So there's a discrepancy as far as that's concerned. And then soup and marrow bones as well, which is included for everybody except for chicken in the circumstances. So those definition points are critical, and there seems to be a distinction in terms of kind of what is included in offal for the different species of animals.
How do these classification issues impact producers, retailers, and consumers, particularly in terms of compliance and pricing?
My biggest concern around that is the uncertainty. So there's a substantial risk as to whether a particular item is zero rated or not zero rated in the circumstances. So sort of throughout the production chain, from producers all the way to retailers, and big risk at retail level, because if they are concerned that something doesn't qualify, they would then charge 15 or maybe 15.5% VAT on that, which makes it more expensive for the consumer. So you don't want that in the circumstances. So that's the one side of things, if they take a conservative view around it. The alternative is that they're happy that a product is zero rated, so they reduce their prices. They decrease the price by by 15%, so that the consumer gets the advantage, and then SARS comes in and audits a year or two or three later, and then says, no, well, that item was in fact not zero rated, so you now have to declare VAT on it, and then there will be penalties. And these days there are two levels of penalties. There are late payment penalties and understatement penalties that can go up to sort of 150%, and in some instances 200%, and interest on that amount. So I mean, there's a big risk for sort of everybody in the supply chain. Their tax risk is increased quite substantially unless there's absolute certainty in terms of what products are zero rated. I mean, the other thing that sort of comes out of these definitions that I'm unsure about, if you look at sort of the products that are out there, and maybe the current wording of it. I mean, there are mixed offal packs, so that happens, and that is available in the market. But if you sort of drill down into what it's made up of, so I mean, there are liver packs, for example, that you would often have. I mean, their tongues, there's oxtail, I mean, their giblets. So the question is whether it's only mixed offal packs that qualify for the zero rating, and or whether it is whether if you sell heads and feet, for example, and not the other components of offal, whether that would be zero rated as well. So I mean, I think that this has a significant risk for everybody that's in this space, unfortunately, because of this level of uncertainty. And then for consumers, it probably means that the advantage that they would get in terms of the reduction in prices is in fact quite limited, and it would in fact I mean, there's a potential that it would sort of change consumer behavior, in the sense that you would, I mean, to get the low price, it has to be mixed offal packs, and then there are kind of unintended consequences in terms of the products that are out there, and I mean, the components from a producer perspective as well, from volume, in terms of what products are actually sold or not sold in the circumstances.
Do you think that retailers will in fact pass down the zero rated discounts to consumers?
I think they will. It's something that we know that policyholders have always raises the reason for not introducing additional zero ratings. So sort of very much aware of that concern. I mean, what was interesting is we looked at the sort of the last product that was zero rated in 2019. So sanitary pads became became zero rated at that particular point in time. And if you look at kind of the pricing, and you look at the sort of profit margins by retailers, and talking to the big retailers that operated even at that time, you can see that the price that in fact decreased by 15% and remained decreased by 15%. I think it's a little bit more complicated in the agricultural space, because prices are more volatile than that, and there's very sort of a big impact on supply and demand that impacts prices. But I mean, kind of sort of a counter to that, I mean, there are a lot of organizations these days that track inflation. So there's a lot of history around it. I mean, Stats SA does that. The NAMC, the Agricultural Board, does that. There's some private, public benefit organizations that do that. So, I think that there will be visibility if people don't decrease it in the circumstances. And I've always thought that market forces will have that impact, that customers will expect it, so people will do it, and on that basis it will decrease. So that I don't have a big concern as far as that's concerned.
Looking at the two possible outcomes, tell us what happens in the event that the draft is signed as is, or in the event that amendments are needed.
There are almost two components to that, and something that I'm very concerned about. I mean, what the VAT Act does do, and in fact, all the Tax Act is they make provision for the minister to, make an announcement in the budget in respect of tax rates, including the VAT rate. And that the new rate would then apply from the date and at the rate that he has announced it, and then it says subject to approval by Parliament within a 12-month period. Now that's never really been an issue before, because there's always been acceptance that Parliament will accept it and sign it off, and I mean we've sort of had that in every prior year except for this year. So I mean I want to draw an sort of important distinction there, in the sense that the increase in rate the minister's announced, and he's empowered to do that in terms of the Act. I mean, the additional definitions of zero ratings, there is in fact no enabling provision for the minister to just make an announcement like this. So I think that technically actually need legislation to be passed and probably signed by the president and promulgated before it comes into effect. So there is a little bit of a disconnect between the rate increase and the additional zero ratings. And then we also know that sort of the government of national unity, the country is very much split as to whether there should be a VAT rate increase or not. I mean, what hasn't been explicitly said is that the zero ratings are linked to the rate increase. So if that doesn't go ahead, does that mean that the zero ratings get withdrawn? Which I think could be, I mean, certainly for the industry would be a concern. And I mean, I think there's a lot of credibility that would be lost in the in in the circumstances. But at this point in time, given the split at the Standing Committee on Finance, and I mean the debate that is going on, I mean I think that it is uncertain as to exactly what will proceed. And I mean this is actually very concerning, and people need to start making changes as far as, I mean, in terms of systems, in terms of products, in terms of deciding what products should be zero rated. And the current wording is not adequate in terms to do that. And I don't think there's really time until the 1st of May to get certainty on it. So I mean, the draft bill as it is at the moment definitely needs to be amended. I mean, National Treasury has asked for comments on that, by the end of the month. If there are any changes, it'll have to go back to the Standing Committee on Finance, and this process is going to take a while. So I think we have to see amendments, but whether that'll be in time to give people certainty as to how they should and what products they should charge VAT on, and at what rate on the 1st of May, I think may be problematic.
What measures or revisions would you recommend to ensure clarity in the classification of these offal products and the rate increase for that matter?
I mean, on the zero rated list, I mean, the critical thing, I think, in terms of getting it right, is there has to, sort of be more cognizance taken of the definitions of the Agricultural Products Act. So I think that'll get rid of the uncertainty. I think it needs to be made clear that it is in fact not only offal and mixed packs of offal that qualify for the zero rating, but the various components of it as well, because otherwise I don't think the zero rating really means anything in the circumstances at all. So it has to be able to say if it's livers, then it's also zero rated. For example, so you could take individual items, and the zero rating would still apply. And then there needs to be consistency in terms of soup bones as well. So soup bones very definitely needs to be inserted into the definition associated with chicken, and sort of the point about intestines. I mean, there are a lot of sort of technical aspects that need to be clarified. I think that we do need more definitions to achieve that, and then I mean SARS should also then issue sort of an interpretation note or a binding general ruling, so that there is more guidance in terms of the decision-making process and more certainty about what products can and cannot be zero rated.
What is your overall opinion on the VAT rate increase and how it's going to affect the fiscus and consumers?
I'm very concerned about the VAT rate increase, and sort of having two increases within a 12-month period. I think is problematic for business. Obviously, it has negative impact on households because everything becomes more expensive, and uh, it will probably initially have an impact on economic growth because people simply won't have money, additional money to spend because they now, every product is a little bit more expensive. My big concern is very much around the timeline of implementation and the uncertainty that exists at the moment as to whether it really can go ahead, and whether there are problems with the current legislation, and whether we need new legislation to correct that in the circumstances. And business is a little bit concerned at the moment, especially large business, where you know everybody started projects or should have started projects to start implementing the change. You need to introduce new tax rates into your system. Your invoicing system needs to be updated. Your pricing needs to be updated, or if you're a retailer, on all your shelves, although SARS has made an sort of given 6 months implementation as far as that's concerned. So it's not something that can that sort of happens overnight. It's a project. You need to make changes, you need to test the changes, and then you need to implement the changes. So a lot of resources going into that at the moment. And if the VAT rate doesn't go ahead, well, sort of wasted effort in that regard. And then you have to repeat the process in 12 months time, because on the 1st of April 2026 the VAT rate will increase again by 0.5%. I mean, we've seen some systems that in fact can't deal with a decimal point. So to actually change from 15 to 15.5 is massively problematic in the circumstances. So I think it's a big drain on resources at the moment, and then the uncertainty, as to whether it can realistically go ahead, and the consequences of it, going ahead and then being maybe undone later, I think is creating a lot of uncertainty in the market, and there needs to be some clarification or some certainty provided on that as soon as possible.
Finally, Charles, the question on everyone's lips seems to be, are there better alternatives that government can use to increase revenue other than the rate increases?
So, from a revenue side of things, I've always sort of believed that that is probably the best mechanism to use in the circumstances, because it's more broad based. It's more difficult to implement, but it does have a. The numbers are quite big as far as that's concerned. Sort of 1% increase gives you in the region of about 30 billion rand. So I mean, yeah, I do support that. And I mean, it is true to say that in African terms and in sort of global terms, our VAT rate is quite low in comparison to other countries. I mean, the point that keeps on coming out is that we have more of an expenditure problem than an income problem, and the focus should very much be on reducing expenditure. And I'm not talking about austerity measures where there's simply not enough money to go around, but real strategic areas where there's excess expenditure that is not necessarily adding the value that it should. And the problem, I mean, there's sort of two big things that are coming, that will have an impact on it. One being the national health insurance, and how that's going to be funded. That probably can't be funded from existing revenue sources. And the International Monetary Fund, IMF, says that one needs to find a new tax if one's going to go ahead with that. And then sort of the SRD, the distress grant as well, the 360 rand. Where if that is a permanent feature and is now become by default a permanent feature, kind of cannot be funded from existing tax tax income. So one's going to have to be quite innovative in terms of balancing new tax sources and the existing one without making the rates completely unrealistic in the circumstances. But I don't think that a wealth tax is a good idea. I think that has a negative impact on everybody. So at a principal level, that is the way to go, but it has to be very carefully thought through.
Thank you once again for joining us today, Charles. It's been very insightful, and we certainly look forward to chatting to you again.
Thanks, Jenny. Great chatting again, and yeah, hopefully we'll get this moving in a direction.